Good evening and welcome this evening to our summer series. This is the last of the lessons on the summer series as I have been asked to deal with Hebrews chapter 11 and 12. But in verse 12, or in chapter 12, we have the summation. We have the very end. We have in chapter 9 the idea of encouraging, that we are to exhort one another, we're to encourage one another. You come to chapter 10 and you find that because of persecution, there were many in the church, Jews that have been converted to Christianity, were leaving because of persecution. And then in chapter 11, the writer here, and we don't know who the writer is, but he has basically a Jewish audience, begins to talk about the great heroes of faith that those people would know about. When the writer would say, do you remember so-and-so? Do you remember David? Do you remember? And these people would remember. And so chapter 11 tells us about those heroes of faith. And then after the encouragement, he talks about in chapters 12, verses 1 through 3, go on. After you've been encouraged, go on. In chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, the writer says, seeing that we are compassed about, you have like an Olympic setting. You have the stadium, the great Colosseum, and inside you have the hundreds of rows. You have royalty. And sitting up there in those stands, Hebrews chapter 11 talks about those great heroes of faith. Seeing that we are compassed about, surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, every sin that turns us away. And so he's talking about in this life, it is very difficult. There are many things that come our way that make us turn. And then we're told to run with patience, run the marathon, run with patience the race that is set before you. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher. He is the one who became flesh, Hebrews chapter 2. In order to defeat death, he died, and in his death, he defeated death. He went before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him suffered the cross, despised the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so you have the picture, not of running that 26 miles marathon, of leaving in the Colosseum, coming back into the Colosseum to receive the prize. But the Lord allows us, as we're taking these laps, to come back through the middle of the Colosseum. And one of those great heroes of faith is able to come down while we are taking a breather, taking a rest, drinking our water, and to give us a word that will encourage us, that will empower us, that will cause us to understand the very essence of who they are. That's what they'll be telling us. This is why that I am in the book of life. This is why I am in the book, the heroes of faith. And we would heartily say, I needed that. And then we'd say amen and go on. There was a Kenya runner. His name was Abel Mutau. And he was only a few meters from the end of the finishing line. But he got so confused. He got confused by the signs. And he stopped. And he thought he had finished the race. But there was a Spanish runner, Ivan Fernandez. And he was right behind him, and he realized what had happened. And so he started shouting to him, run, run, keep running. But Mutau did not understand Spanish. And realizing what was going on, Fernando simply took Mutau and pushed him to victory, pushed him across the finishing line. And a reporter came to him and asked him the question, Ivan, what in the world were you doing? What was going on? Why did you do this? And Ivan replied, my dream is that one day we can have some sort of a community life where we push ourselves and help each other win. And the reporter insisted, but why did you let the Kenyan win? To which Ivan replied, I didn't let him win. He was going to win. The race was his. And so the reporter insisted and kept asking him, but you could have won. And Ivan looked at him and replied, but what would be the merit of my victory? What would be the honor of that medal? And what would my mother think of it? The values are transmitted, he said, from generation to generation. What values do I teach my children on? How much do you inspire others? And most of us take advantage of people, their weakness, and instead of helping, to strengthen them. And so this is what we find in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, is those heroes of faith come down and they push us and they help us to win. So this is the last night of our summer series. It will be followed by, on Sunday morning, the Foundations of Faith. That is a class that will be taught by Jared. Jared has been teaching the book of Genesis and got through that, so he will start on the foundation of faith. On Wednesday at night, Brother Robert will be teaching. Robert Shepherd will be teaching on a sticky faith. Parents and their children will be studying together on things that help us to be faithful. And then taking this place will be a lesson on the letters, the epistles of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. They'll be taught by one of our shepherds, Bob Beeler, by Tyler Vandenall, and by Todd Johnson. So I pray that you're looking forward to those and that you'll watch them and that you'll learn and that you'll be edified and that you will be strengthened. Help you to become a great disciple and closer to the Lord. And so we begin the run. We begin that run of faith outside, out in the fields, out in that long, and the thing about a marathon is that you know that after 26 months, 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, average good runner, 2 hours, he knows you're getting close to the end. But the race that we run, the Christian race, we don't know what is on that straight and narrow, straight being difficult. There are obstacles that we're going to have to navigate in our Christian life. But another thing is we don't know when the end comes. And so instead of coming after that 26 miles into that stadium and being cheered on by those that are sitting up in the stands, God lets us come through out of our run and be encouraged by those that are in the stadium, those great heroes of faith that he talks about in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. Some of the greatest material that I have read on this is by John C. Maxwell in his book called Running with the Giants, that we're able to have a journey with the great disciples of the Bible. And so as we're out running and we come back into the stadium, I see a gentleman coming down, a man who is 950 years old. And he takes me and he gently talks to me and he whispers in my ear, Mike, one person can make a difference. And I realized this is Noah. In the book of Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verses 5 through 8, the first time that grace is mentioned is that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then as he begins to tell me his story, he lets me know that one person can make a difference. He can make a difference in his family. For in chapter 7 of the book of Genesis, beginning in verse 1, God talks about you and your family. It wasn't just him. It was him and his family. But Noah also whispers in my ear, not only can one person make a difference, he says you can make a difference for God's creation. You can make the place that you live a better place. But he also lets me know in that word of advice to help me is that I can make a difference for future generations. It has been my habit, it has been my interest, it has been my custom that wherever I live, I plant fruit trees. And I have taken my children back and I have showed them these trees. They're able to eat the apples off the tree. And so an elderly gentleman was out planting a tree, and it was just a small tree, and a man stopped and said, "Why are you planting that tree? You will never be able to eat the fruit of it." And he said, "But someone will." And so Noah says, Mike, you can make a difference for your family. You can make a difference for God's creation, the environment you live in. You can make a difference for future generations, but also you can make a difference for God. In the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 9, God saved the world through Noah. God's plan was, according to the book of Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, where that redemptive promise starts and goes all the way to the book of Revelation, the redemption of mankind. But he also said, Mike, I know that I'm gray-headed. I know that I'm bent over. I know that I'm 950 years old. But do you know, you can make a difference at any age. And then he reminded me of the story of the New Testament in the book of John, the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 13. Mike, you remember the story? I know you've read it. You remember the little boy who had the fish, had the loaves. He was not my age. He was but a lad, a boy. And he made a difference at his age. And so Noah's words of encouragement would simply be, don't be afraid to stand out in a crowd. Make a difference. And different makers, those that make a difference, are different people. But as I was leaving, he told me, he said, don't be afraid to do something for the first time. And so when you see the rainbow, remember the promises, but also remember that one person can make a difference. And leaving, I asked Noah a question. How difficult was it to obey God and do something that seemed so foolish to other people? I went back up into the stands and I continued running the race. And I ran for several miles, and I came back into the Coliseum, and I noticed that God sent down out of that stand a beautiful woman, and she told me her name was Esther. And Esther whispered in my ear as a word of encouragement, God has a very special place for you. You see, Esther said, I felt out of place for so many years, and she finds her place. And in the book of Esther, chapter 4, beginning in verses 13 through 16, no place is out of place when you're in God's place. And so God chose Esther to fill that very special place. And so there's courage. There was courage for Esther. There was initiative for Esther when she came to understand her purpose in life. It was a great trip to be with Esther, to find out and to know the great things that God had chosen for her to do. And so the words of encouragement. Esther's words of encouragement is that for a period of time, you may not understand God's planning, and you may not understand his purpose in your life. Have faith and remain obedient to the Lord. And when you realize God's place for you, here's what she tells me. She tells me, when you realize that, you'll feel empowered. You'll know that this is God's work for you. And then she said, taking a risk. Taking a risk is so much easier, Mike, when you know that God is in control. It's an issue of trust. Do you trust the Lord? And as I was about to leave, I asked her the question, how did you feel the times that you felt out of place? Have you ever felt out of place? You always felt like you weren't a banana, one of the bunch. And so Esther encourages me, and I keep on running. And as I run several miles, and I come back through the Colosseum. And coming back through the Colosseum, I stop and I take a drink of water. And an elderly gentleman comes down. He has on a beautiful garment. And I realize it's Joseph. And so seeing that I am compassed about by such a great cloud of witnesses cheering me on, Joseph would say to me, Mike, do not give up on your dreams. Take the dream all the way and don't stop. Don't give up. Don't give up on your dreams, even if you don't start off well. And Joseph did not. Joseph's life evolves around 3 periods of time, 3 40-year periods of time. First one was failure. The second was in the wilderness. And the third, God sent him back to the period of where he failed and recommissioned him. And I realized that Joseph had a dream. So don't give up on your dreams, even if you don't start well. Don't give up on your dreams, even if your family don't support you. You remember the story of Joseph? Joseph was hated by his brothers. He was that young cocky. He was very pervasive. He was in their face with, this is what you're going to do. One day you're going to bow down to me. That don't go well with the older brothers. And they decide to put him in a cistern. Reuben, the oldest, decided that he was not going to be killed. But they had sold him to the Ishmaelites, and he was taken off into captivity. And so in the book of Genesis chapter 37 and verse 10, we're told that he's a dreamer. In chapter 37, verses 19 through 20, you can see what he becomes through his dreams. And so Joseph tells me, don't give up on your dream, even if your journey is full of surprises, and his was. We have Joseph. Joseph was misunderstood by his family. That's a time to give up. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. That's a time to give up. Joseph also was living in a strange land, far from his home. That's a time to give up. But he was given favor by Potiphar. That's a time to get up. He was also wrongly accused by Potiphar's wife. That's a time to give up. He was put in charge of all of the prisoners. That's a time to go on. He is also forgotten by the chief butler. That's a time to give up. And he was also remained in prison for 2 years. That's a time to give up. But he interpreted Potiphar's dreams. That's a time to go on. And he became second in command of all of Egypt. That is a time to go on. And so Joseph whispers in my ears, don't give up. Don't give up on your dreams, even if it takes a long time to realize it. And it was 23 years from the dream and to the fulfillment. You never know. You never know what God's timetable looks like, Mike. You just hang in there. And so Joseph's word of encouragement to you and I would be that God is always with you. Don't give up, Mike. Keep running. I know that you've had a difficult time, but don't give up. Develop yourself during the down times. Joseph became the great leader while he was in the wilderness. Then we realize that self-promotion can never replace divine promotion. If we stop promoting ourselves and promoting the Lord, things would be different. And so Joseph said, when your dreams are realized, it is sweeter than you could imagine. In the book of Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20, one of the beautiful passages of the scriptures, as he is talking to his brothers who would have killed him, save Reuben, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, listen carefully, as it is the day, to save many people alive. Joseph was used by God. And now Joseph is encouraging me. Look at my life, Mike. Look what is accomplished. And as I was about to leave the stadium, I'd asked Joseph but one question. Joseph, how easy? How difficult? How difficult was it for you to forgive your brothers? And I would think about it, and I would continue the race. And then finally, I want to look at Moses. You go out, you run again, you get tired, you slow down, you come back into the stadium, and an elderly gentleman comes down, worn out, bent over, and he grabs me and he whispers in my ear, live in the faith zone, not in the safe zone. You remember Moses stepping out in faith. He overcame the experiences of his past, the killing of the Egyptian. Moses overcame the comforts of his presence. But he also overcame the insecurities of his future. In the book of Exodus chapter 3 and in verse 11, and then in chapter 4 verses 1 through 10, oh Lord, here's what he's saying. Why don't you send someone else? There was a lot of insecurity there. There was a lot of failure there. And there was simply Moses saying, I don't want to do it. And he finally leaned on God, who knows every detail of our future. And God used him. And so as I'm about to leave, Moses said, I've got a few more words that I want to speak to you. Moses' words of encouragement. We do not naturally leave the safe zone. I don't know if you realize it or not, but in the book of Acts chapter 6, the church was growing. And Acts chapter 7 was the dispersion. And the church would not have grown unless they were ordered out of Jerusalem and they went to Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the world. And so it was something that was unnatural, because we simply do not leave our safe zones. But he said that the safe zones are going to rob you of your greatest moments and your greatest memories. Get out. 20 years from now, you and I will have more disappointments at the risks that we didn't take than by the ones that we did. My question to Moses as I'm about to run out of the stadium: Moses, so many times you were taken out of your comfort zone to obey God. Did it ever get any easier? These words of encouragement, these people coming down, these great heroes of faith, the stories are there because we know the stories. They're there to encourage us to continue running the race. Last night I read this on the Jenkins Institute, put out by Dale and Jeff Jenkins. He said, I'm a city boy. I grew up in the cityest of cities, Birmingham, Alabama. Several who read this know my father-in-law, and he was a preacher for the same church in a small town for 60 years. He is a man of faith and a tremendously dedicated man who raised 4 faithful children. Not only does he preach, he farms. He grows stuff and he feeds pigs and cows. He's also a builder. He builds banks and churches and buildings and businesses and schools and houses. Over the last 40 years, when we go home, he'd take me along on whatever project he was involved in. I learned a lot of things over the years, like how to stop a full-grown hog charging at you. You hit it on the snout with a 2x4. Or how to haul silage or roof a house. And I was thinking about roofing houses the other day. I think in my next career, I'm going to be a roofer. It's hot, it's cold, it's risky, but it can be back-breaking. But what I grew to love the most about roofing is how very simple and obvious progress is. You put down a square and you see the work you've done. You put down a single shingle and it shows the advancing of the completion of the work. Part of what makes our role, and that is those that are running in this marathon, what makes it so difficult is that we can go on for weeks and we can go on for months and even years and never really know if we're making an impact on an individual, on a congregation, or on a project. Our work is slow and it is tedious. It is repetitious. You don't see week by week how someone has grown in faith and love for others, in commitment to Jesus Christ. But on that rare moment, when you hear that person you pulled away from the fire pray a fervent prayer, when you see a man you've led to the Lord recognized as a shepherd, when you see a young person who's exhibiting spiritual maturity and dedication, who wants to look at a roof when you can do this? I like roofers and I like roofing. Nothing can take the place when God has, in a very small way, used you to lead souls to Him. We're not roofers. It's much harder to see the progress. But God is at work as we serve Him. Do not quit. Blessed are those that die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their works, and their labors do follow them. You and I, when we die faithful, will be put in that stadium to cheer others on. When people think about the life that we have lived, the life of a child of God, think about yourself, and I want you to think, what would they hear me say if I came down to encourage them. Thank you for being with us. We have enjoyed our time together, and I look forward to the study in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John next week. Join us if you will.